Some of you may be wondering why I'm trying this. The best answer I could possibly give you is the fact that the number of messages and requests, not demands, let's make this clear. People are not yelling, people are not making fun, but I have had message after message after message, especially within this past week, saying, when are you going to start doing your videos again? I basically am apologizing here because I have absolutely no doubt that this is going to be completely subpar quality versus what I would rather do. But this is me attempting to restart the engine, so to speak. There will still be no webcam. I am adamant on that topic. Not until I am actually better. Which I am nowhere near right now. So, rather than delve into Kingdom Hearts, which is going to be this nightmarishly complex thing of Doom, I thought I'd start with something relatively simple. And as I started doing running through my head what I wanted to talk about the next episode of Voyager, I realized I really should do a separate video, especially since I am just starting out doing this again. You know what I mean? So this is going to be a little circuitous, so do please follow with me, okay? The first thing I want to talk about is the stereotype of the Star Trek nerd, okay? Now, I'm sure any of you out there who are watching this are familiar with what I'm talking about. The idea of the Trekker who cannot possibly be pleased unless Star Trek is this or that, you know, whether... And it tends to vary, right? You know, whether they adhere to Roddenberry's vision, or maybe it's because they, you know, specifically want, you know, Picard, and they think TNG was the proper era, or maybe DS9 was the only true Star Trek. You get the point, right? The kind of stereotyping, it's the same thing we hear about all sorts of things, actually, if you really get down to it. It's not a new concept. The idea of someone who is so into something that they take it to ludicrous extremes, and, you know, obviously that person is unpopular and unliked and all that fun stuff. So, the reason I bring that up is I want to stress something that I don't think I've ever actually told you guys. I have been a fan of Star Trek for a very long time, since before the Next Generation came out. And in all of those years, I have only actually known or met one individual who was like that. Just the one. Now, I have seen a vast multitude of individuals with differing and varying opinions across that time. You know, people who... I've heard some people think Original Series is the only good show. I've heard some people say that Enterprise was actually one of their favorites. I've heard some people say that Deep Space Nine and TNG are their favorite. You know, I've heard some people say that TNG was bad. I have heard a vast array of opinions, but as far as the, you know, the nerd, I've only encountered one. All the rest have been geeks. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I want to stress that what I'm about to start talking about has nothing to do with my perceived nerditry. I would argue that I am not a nerd, and I would argue that based on my definition of a nerd, which we're not going to get into. But I want to stress that I am not trying to say that Star Trek is and always shall be this one thing. There's only one true Star Trek, and it is this. No. I'm just trying to give out my opinion, just like I always do. But I've been thinking about this topic lately, because one of the questions I was asked most often is, why Voyager? Why did you pick that to start? Now, I have answered this in several parts before, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Some of you may have seen a show called Battlestar Galactica, the new one, the reboot. Now, Battlestar Galactica was, to put it kindly, unpleasant, right? I do not care for it personally, and I have gone on record saying that, and I've gone on record as giving my reasons as to why. No need to go over that again. But it was a very well accomplished, very well put together, well directed, well acted, well written show, right? With some niggles towards the end. We won't get into that. And I did actually watch the whole series front to back, with the exception of a few individual scenes. Now, someone else recently mentioned something with regards to Battlestar Galactica, which I think was an excellent way to summarize why it is I don't actually like that show, and why I'll never watch it again. Battlestar Galactica makes me uncomfortable. That was the quote. Something about that really clicked with me, because it is in my opinion that when you are doing a show and trying to be serious about it, and you go so hard and so heavy into horrible, terrible things, and actually show many of these horrible, terrible things on screen, then you have successfully gone over the line. Because the moment you make your audience feel uncomfortable, and I love that word because it's very accurate, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. Now, I'm sure many of you would argue against me with this, and that's fine, of course. We all have our own opinions. Like I said, this is just my own opinion. And you're probably wondering why I'm bringing this up, especially in relation to Voyager. Let me get to that. First, I want to point out that one of the things I tend to enjoy is a serious storyline, right? Or a serious story, or a serious game, or a serious movie, book, whatever. But the problem is, I have noticed in my years that most people tend to confuse serious with the grit. They have to make it all gritty, and they have to make it super serious and super gritty. They have to have murder and death and rape and all these horrible things. No, that is not serious. The reason most writers and directors and developers go towards those extremes is because, if you'll forgive me for being frank, it is easier to write those kinds of situations than something that is actually serious and has a degree of subtlety and layers to it. This is not bashing Battlestar Galactica, okay? This is... I've kind of moved on in points here, alright? So please, please don't get on to me about that. I like a serious story. But so often when someone presents this seriousness, it ends up just being uncomfortable. Sometimes it goes further past uncomfortable. Sometimes it's just plain gross. Sometimes it's plain horrifying. Sometimes it's, why is this on my screen? But I think that word uncomfortable summarizes it best, because ultimately you're sitting here watching or playing this and you're thinking, why is this what I am being presented? You didn't have to do this. You actually have the power as a writer, as a developer, to not make this happen. You have that power. You can even make it make sense. All it requires is a little effort. I should know. Why are you doing this? Why is this there? I don't want to see this. This is terrible. So, oh, forgive me. Back. The reason I bring this up in relation to Battlestar Galactica is for all the things that show I don't like about. One thing I did like was they were always very open and very honest about the fact that they were going into extremes, that they were trying very hard to be the great. That they wanted to be just as horrible as everything I just talked about. And I'm not giving examples, because I don't want to think about it. I don't. But that's my point. They were open about it. They were like, this is Battlestar Galactica. This is something horribly gritty, right? I like that openness because it basically means that you wouldn't be caught by surprise by it, you know what I mean? Not unless you were completely ignorant of the show and everything about it, which is unlikely, even if you were pointed towards it. Battlestar Galactica starts with the near genocide of the human race, and it goes down from there. I like that openness, and that's one of the things I will definitely give the show credit for. Now let's start wrapping this back up. Let's say you were watching a Star Trek episode and all of a sudden you saw something horribly, terrifyingly gritty, like happens in Battlestar Galactica in a Star Trek episode. Now, I don't know about you, but I know what my reaction would be, and the reaction of several people I can speak for. Oh my god! It's not just... see, at this point, it's not just, you know, the grit. It's not just unpleasant and uncomfortable. It's also a shock, in a bad way. It's like stubbing your toe. You didn't expect this. You weren't prepared for this. You weren't braced for this. It's just out of nowhere, bam, on this show you were sitting down to watch. Suddenly you see something you weren't expecting, something that should not have been there. This is what I like to call the true crime of failure in truth in advertising. When you fail at truth in advertising, it is something genuinely wrong, in my opinion, because you are misleading people who will get the wrong examples, and so much of their impression, enjoyment, or lack thereof will be dependent based on the fact that you lied to them. If I were to use an extremely mild example of this, let's say you made a game called, I don't know, Paper Mario Sticker Star, and you labeled it as the next Paper Mario game. Now that is a lie. Paper Mario Sticker Star is not a Paper Mario. It is not a Mario RPG. It is nothing of the sort. It is a competent if ultimately lackluster, 3D Mario game. Mostly a side-scroller. But if you pick up that game, you're not going to be saying, oh, alright, this is alright. You're going to be saying, this is terrible, because I was misled, because there was no truth in advertising here. Now you're probably, okay, let me finally wrap all of this all around and get to my actual point. Why is it, after all these years, and all the shows that have seen a resurgence, and all the old television shows and movies and video games that people have gone back to and still play or still watch, Voyager has not seen this resurgence? The answer why, that Voyager has never been able to overcome that malaise, that notoriety, the infamy of being the bad Star Trek show, is because of this reason. People go to Star Trek to see serious to light-hearted, mildly interesting stories that are usually character-driven pieces. Voyager was not truly a Star Trek for a fairly large period of its run, and many of the episodes I've covered already are like that. And frankly, 2 seasons worth of episodes that are not a Star Trek are enough. Now, this is a much more mild example than the Battlestar Galactica extreme example I just gave, but the impact is effectively the same. That initial impression, that initial mentality, that initial viewing point of this is not, alright, I'm going to sit down and watch Star Trek, wait, what is this, is hard to overcome. And while Voyager did eventually get its footing right about at the end of Season 3, I believe, right about the end of the Season 3, by that point the damage was already done. We came to this expecting Star Trek, the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. If you go to just about any science fiction buff or fan, and I know I am speaking in generalization here, but true, if you go to just about any, that is what I said, at least I think that's what I said, they will say that those 3 shows were good shows. At the very least, they will say TNG and Deep Space Nine were good shows, if not excellent shows. Certainly had some flaws. But when you think about TNG, what do you remember? Do you remember Code of Honor? Do you remember, what's that other terrible, terrible episode? I actually can't think of the name of it. Well, there you go, there's my point in a nutshell. Or do you think of Best of Both Worlds? Do you think of Time's Arrow? Do you think of Tapestry? Do you think of the episode with Picard where he's living a full lifetime within a space of 30 seconds? There are so many, and there are many, many more good to great episodes. That's what we remember, because it was Star Trek. It kept true to the heart of Star Trek. I just spoke about this not too long ago, when I was talking about the new Star Trek movie, Into Darkness. TNG and Deep Space Nine were both unequivocally Star Trek. Even with all the seriousness that was in Deep Space Nine and TNG, and all the lightheartedness that was also in both, they managed to keep that focus. Voyager, for much of its early run, was not Star Trek. And that was the problem, and that is why so many people still look down upon Voyager and say no, and refuse to give it another shot. And to be frank, I don't blame them. It's hard to overcome that kind of problem. I kept watching Voyager because it was something I could do with my family. And we had been Star Trek fans, well, they had been Star Trek fans basically as long as they had been a part of my family, is probably the best way I could put that. And it was something we could do together. And I'm kind of glad we did, because I got to see Voyager become Star Trek. I got to see character-driven stories come back into the focus. I got to see plots that weren't so nonsensical it made you want to rip your head off. If you'll forgive me for segueing for just a moment, one of Voyager's earlier problems, too, in relation to this problem, is one of the great challenges as a writer is wanting the audience to ask the right questions as they're walking away from your piece. Video game, book, movie, television, doesn't matter. What I mean by that is you do want the audience to be asking questions for the most part. You want them to be saying, what made him do that? Well, if this happened, then that also means that. You want them to think about your work. And when they're doing that, you want that thinking about it and that questioning it to increase their enjoyment of the work, right? You want them to realize the layers that you put in there. You want them to see all the subtleties you put in. You want them to be like, looking at the unknowns that you placed there deliberately and wondering and theorizing why. What you do not want is them to walk away with asking questions that are along the lines of, why would anyone be so brain-stunningly stupid? Why would anyone engage in something that's absolutely moronic like that? What was wrong with this? I don't understand this section, you know. Those are the wrong questions to be left asking at the end of a work. And early Voyager, and indeed some other Voyager episodes as well, were very infamous for having completely nonsensical plots that had that exact problem, that left the viewer asking the wrong questions. Now, if you're watching this video, there's a very good chance you know me. And you know that I only do videos based on of things that I like. There are some exceptions to this, but I think Voyager, if I look at Voyager as a whole, I do like Voyager as a whole, right? So, you know, even though Threshold makes me want to, you know, rip my ears out and choke myself to death on them, I'm still going to do a video on Threshold because it's still Voyager and I still like Voyager. So my point remains sound, in other words. So why do I like Voyager? Why is it I still enjoy this show? Well, the first reason is I did give it a shot. I did bother to go ahead and watch it, even through the muck, until it got good, and then it got better, and then it got even better. They still had some problems. Of course they did. Every show does. And there were some things that were just frustrating in the later ends of the series. The excessive focus on 7 of 9 comes to mind, but we will talk about that later. But by the same token, there was still so much good there. Not just potential, but actually interesting storylines. And they also managed to finally push the character-driven pieces more and more as the series went on. Because, again, that is Star Trek. But ultimately, as I sit down and answer this question of why I like Voyager, I have many answers for you, and I've given several of them, but I have a new answer for you. One that I only really realized somewhat recently, since I stopped doing my ruminations, and prior to now, obviously. It is a rare thing that you look at a cast, and that cast, those individuals, those human beings playing those roles, have instant chemistry with each other. Even when a cast, if you have a cast of good actors who have good chemistry with each other and have a bad script, nevertheless, it is still going to be more enjoyable than it has any right to be, because of the actors and because of their chemistry with each other, both in real life and within their characters. I mentioned way back in Caretaker that the literal first scene Harry Kim and Tom Paris were in, bam, it was just right there, just like that. You could see the friendship, you could see the chemistry, you could see the interactions, you could see the mix, you could see the dynamic between the two, literally in the first scene, and it never actually stopped. The two actually have great chemistry on screen. And the more I started watching this show, and the more I started watching the behind-the-scenes stuff, and the making-of stuff, and the bloopers, and all that fun stuff, seeing the actual actors without doing their lines, I began to realize that I had been enjoying that chemistry without even recognizing it for being there. On Next Generation, the chemistry between the actors is so obvious and apparent that it's hard not to see it, even early on. In the Deep Space Nine, one of the biggest problems they had early on was a lack of what I'm talking about. Season 1, Deep Space Nine, a lot of the actors were really struggling to find their ground, and really did not mesh well together. However, when you think of Deep Space Nine, you think of, Season 2, Season 3, and on, what you think of is how great the actors were. Well, okay, one of the things you can think of is how great the actors got along with each other, and how great they ended up working together. I mean, for God's sakes, Season 1 Bashir is all I have to say about that. Never mind Odo and Kira, and I could keep going. Probably the only actor who really had his footing in the first season, in my frank opinion, was the guy who played O'Brien. Forgive me for not knowing his name, because he's an awesome guy. But Voyager, by sheer chance, had a cast that actually clicked, just like that, right from the word go. Every single member of that cast knew what they were doing and got along well with each other, on screen and off. And that chemistry elevates, especially within a television show. You need that kind of chemistry in a television show, if you'll forgive me for being blunt. I have been often asked, you know, how do you want, if you had your choice, if you had the powers of the Q, how would you present your story, The Primes? And my first answer is always going to be a TV show. But I guarantee you, the first thing I would spend is a huge amount of time trying to get the right actors for that show, because so much of it depends on the chemistry of the actors with each other, and the actors playing the characters having chemistry with each other. It's a double layer thing, and it's not easy to come by. Voyager, as I've said before, got lucky. And the whole reason Voyager was given a chance in order to prove that it could become Star Trek was because it got lucky early on. Enterprise never got that chance. Enterprise could have become great. I mean that sincerely. Enterprise never got that chance. Thank you, Nemesis, for killing Star Trek. Forgive me for my bitterness. So that is why I like Voyager. One of the reasons I like Voyager. I like Kate Mulgrew. I like Tim Russ. I like Robert Beltran. You know, I forgive me for not knowing all their names completely off the top of my head. Robert Picardo immediately also comes to mind. These actors really did shine basically throughout. There are very few times where they don't, and every single time you can tell it's because of an almost resentment of the lines they have to say and the presentation of it that they have to give. Kate Mulgrew especially has gone on record many times as saying that she absolutely loathes the way that Janeway was portrayed early on. And in fact, one of the reasons they finally stopped making Janeway be so schizophrenic, which happened at about season 4, I think, there's a specific episode where it becomes obvious, was because Kate Mulgrew finally put her foot down and said, enough. There's a specific episode where Harry Kim finally stopped acting like a piece of wood. Again, same exact situation. The actor said, look. And they actually listened to him. So I give credit to Voyager, even though it doesn't quite deserve it, because of its cast. And that is why I will continue to do my Voyager videos, hopefully in the future. Like I said, this was just going to be a short video. For once, it actually was short. But I really wanted to get this point across, because despite all the negatives, despite everything I just said about it not being Voyager, and the being surprised, and the mind-numbingly bad scripts in some cases, Voyager rose to be worthy of being called Star Trek. That is how I'm going to phrase that. And where I come from, that's high honors. And that is why I still like Voyager.